First item of business today is consideration of Business Motion 4618 in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, setting out a timetable for the Stage 3 consideration of the Local Government Finance, Unoccupied Properties, etc. Scotland Bill. I would ask any member who wishes to speak against the motion to press the request to speak button now. I call on Joe Fitzpatrick to move motion number 4618, and in his absence I call on the Cabinet Secretary to perhaps formally move it.
Formally moved, President Officer.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, the Cabinet's a Parliamentary Bureau motion.
Sadly, I'm informed that you're unable to move the motion, Mr Swinney. I'll just take a moment to consult with my clerk. Regrettably, only a member of the Bureau can move that motion, and in the absence of any member in the chamber at this time, we will delay this piece of business until another time. So we will now move on to questions, and the questions today are portfolio questions. And in order to get as many people in as possible, I would prefer short and succinct questions and answers to match, although that may vary. Question one is Margaret McCulloch.
To ask the Scottish Government what budget lines will be affected by the transfer of £250 million from Dell Resource to Dell Capital as announced in the 2013-14 draft budget.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the transfer of nearly £250 million from Dell Resource to Dell Capital for 2013-14 will be made up of transfers within the following budget lines: health, enterprise bodies, the future funds, which are the Warm Homes and Future Transport Funds, the Young Scots Funds, digital, housing and rural and fisheries.
Margaret McCulloch.
Presiding Officer, across the Chamber, we all welcome an emphasis on jobs and growth, but excessive cuts to resource budgets, increased pressure on public sector employment and failure to prioritise capital investment properly can actually dampen growth. So it's a hard balancing act for the Cabinet Secretary. Will he therefore ensure that, in the interest of transparency, parliamentary committees are provided with details of how the £250 million transfer will be implemented, and will he explain how these funds will help the construction sector, which has been rocked by 2 recessions and a decline in industry confidence?
Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I have already set out to Parliament the information in principle around the shift from resource to capital budgets. They are, of course, happening within those discrete budgets, so there is no question, for example, of resource allocations in one subject area being transferred to capital budget in another. It is simply a transfer within those policy areas to support entirely the objectives that Margaret McCulloch has highlighted of ensuring that there is more support in place for the construction sector. And we are doing this, of course, because of the very significant reduction in our capital budget of about a third in the current financial year. I certainly am very happy to explain any further detail that Parliament requires on those transfers. I and my colleagues are involved in scrutiny sessions with different parliamentary committees on these points. And I certainly assure Margaret McCulloch that the purpose of the transfer from resource to capital is to support the construction sector. And as she will be aware from the last quarter of GDP statistics, there was a welcome growth in construction activity within Scotland.
Thank you. Question 2, Mark Griffin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what combined savings local authorities are expected to make in the year 2013-14.
Thank you. Minister Derek Mackay.
As the Scottish Draft Budget 2013-14 sets out, the Scottish Government expects that all public sector bodies individually deliver annual efficiency savings of at least 3% over the course of the current spending review. While there is no requirement for local authorities to report on combined efficiency savings, COSLA has reported that local government cash efficiencies for 11-12 total £428.8 million and that this represents above 3% efficiency savings.
Mark Griffin.
I thank the Minister for his answer, but I did ask for years 2013-14, and while I understand that it's not a requirement, and that perhaps not all local authorities have made public their spending priorities for this year, most have issued a savings package that runs alongside the spending review period. So I would ask why the Minister and his officials don't have that figure for 2013 to allow him and the Cabinet Secretary to undertake an analysis of the impact those cuts local authorities are being forced to make and the impact on Scotland's economy.
Minister.
It is a matter for local authorities to determine the savings they would have to make, because it's not just the income they receive from government, but the demand on their services as well. So the financial pressures that each local authority faces will vary from local authority to local authority, and the engagement process that they then deploy and deliver to determine which savings to make is a matter for them. But the member would, of course, reflect on the fact that share of local government spending as part of Scottish Government spending has been maintained by the Scottish Government and is far more generous than that which they enjoyed from the previous Labour executive.
Thank you. Mary Scanlon.
Thank you. On the basis of the historical concordat between the Scottish Government and local authorities, can I respectfully ask what approach is being taken to address the significant levels of debt currently held by local authorities in Scotland?
Minister.
The debt held by local authorities is kept within the prudential framework to ensure that any borrowing that a local authority chooses to make is within responsible limits as determined within the financial regulations that local authorities are expected to operate within. So that is kept under review and gives us some certainty is affordable and is delivering the kind of economic regeneration we were just discussing earlier.
Thank you. Ken McIntosh.
As well as being anxious over savings they may be expected to make, many in local government are concerned about the impact of the Public Service Pensions Bill currently going through Westminster. Can the Minister tell us whether or not the Scottish Government will bring forward a legislative consent motion so that we are able to discuss the implications of that bill for everyone in local government in Scotland?
Minister.
These matters are under consideration. The Scottish Government has been discussing with partners potential impacts and will continue to do so. But I think it would be far better if matters relating to pensions and other reserved matters were decided in this place rather than by a Westminster Government that the people of Scotland did not elect.
Many thanks. Question 3, Joan McAlpine.
Yes, to ask the Scottish Government how universal benefits will contribute to its preventative spending agenda.
Minister Derek Mackay.
The Scottish Government has made an important strategic decision to move towards preventative spending, which means investing in health and other social policy areas that ultimately saves public money in the long run whilst maintaining or improving outcomes. Our approach to what are sometimes termed as universal benefits supports this agenda. For example, by keeping people independent and living at home for as long as possible, we reduce the need for more expensive care in hospitals or care homes. By abolishing prescription charges, we're helping to ensure that our people receive medical treatment when they need it to live healthy, productive lives. By providing free and more comprehensive eye tests, we can identify and treat a wider range of conditions at an earlier stage, reducing the need for acute interventions. And by abolishing tuition fees, we're encouraging our people into higher education, irrespective of wealth, and supporting participation in the labour market.
Thank you. Joan McAlpine.
I thank the Minister for his answer. The Minister will be aware that at least 73,000 frail elderly people benefit from free personal care. Would the Minister be able to tell me, if these people had to be provided with geriatric beds instead of care packages, how much it would cost the public purse?
Minister.
That would clearly be far more expensive to the public purse. In fact, if you, including the overhead costs, the figure per head per annum would be some £82,000. Now, that is including the overhead costs of the NHS compared to home care, where the cost of such an individual would be as low as £6,240 per annum. These, of course, are averages, but make the point that keeping people at home or in the community or in a care home is not just financially beneficial, socially valuable. It's vital that we protect such policies. Policies, of course, delivered with devolution, but can be safeguarded with independence.
Thank you. Question 4, Liam MacArthur.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it's had with Orkney Islands Council since May 2012 about how the shortfall in local government funding for Orkney compared to Shetland and the Western Isles might be addressed.
Minister Derek Mackay.
I've not had any direct discussions with Orkney Islands Council on this specific issue since May 2012. However, ministers and officials regularly meet with representatives of councils, including Orkney, to discuss such items.
Liam MacArthur.
Can I thank the Minister for his response? I recognise he's a relative newcomer to this aspect of local government finance, but I'm sure his colleague, the Finance Secretary, has briefed him on the very many meetings and correspondence that we've had over the years on this issue. In the past, I recognise there have been problems in opening up the funding formula. In the past, the Finance Secretary has found ways of providing specific funding in relation to, for example, extending ferries in the Orkney Islands to cover this shortfall. I wonder if the Minister might look to the extension of the Hoy Head, which is imminent, as a way of addressing this shortfall in the funding to my constituency.
Minister.
I regret to disappoint the member. I'm not a newcomer to local government finance. I was just looking at it, and of course, fair point from another place as part of the distribution when at COSLA, where all parties came together to agree that the distribution formula is about as fair as it can be. All 32, of course, would like a formula that benefits them, would be more advantageous, but in essence no alternative distribution mechanism has been found. We do probe the integrity of the indicators that then lead to the financial outputs. We'll continue to do so, reflecting on the point that the member has made, but to substantially change the distribution mechanism would require the agreement from COSLA, and as it stands right now, they would prefer that we continue with the current distribution formula, and that transcends all the political parties that are currently members of that convention.
Thank you. Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government must recognise that there are increased costs in delivering services in our island communities, and Orkney loses out even in comparison with other island communities. The same is true for health funding, and although a working group was set up some years ago to look at the distribution of the health formula, no discernible difference has occurred with regard to funding for remote and island communities.
Minister.
That's exactly why, per head of population, the island authorities enjoy the highest per head of population funding of all the local authorities. So that mechanism is already deployed to ensure that the specific and unique circumstances that those populations face is taken on board, and there's specific support for the indicators that are more advantageous to the rural and island nature.
Jamie McGregor.
Thank you. Do ministers factor in the relative underfunding of Orkney compared to other island local authorities when addressing other government grants and funding streams? And what's happened to Special Islands Needs Allowance?
Minister.
As I say, there are mechanisms in place to ensure that the island authorities are well supported, and the top three island authorities have the most generous per head of population funding in Scotland. When it comes to other bid fundings, they're considered on a case-by-case basis. But again, I would ask the member to reflect on the spending decisions that we've made that have ensured that the island communities are supported, not just through this, but through other government financial packages such as RET.
Thank you very much. Question 5, Dr Elaine Murray.
I apologise for the similarity of the wording of the first question. To ask the Scottish Government when the budget lines will be identified in relation to the transfer of £250 million from Dell Resource to Dell Capital, as announced in the 2013-14 draft budget.
Thank you. Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
For the sake of variety, as I said in my answer to Margaret McCulloch, the budget lines have already been identified.
Elaine Murray.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response, and I note what he said in response to my colleague Margaret McCulloch. Can I ask when the committees will become aware of the identification of those budget lines? Because as the Cabinet Secretary is aware, committees are currently scrutinising the budget, and unless committee members are aware of where resource may be transferred from, they are perhaps less able to make a judgment regarding the effect on public services or indeed in public sector employment.
Secretary.
I'm very happy to share that breakdown with the parliamentary committees, and will do so in the light of the exchanges today.
Gavin Brown.
Thanks, Deputy Presiding Officer. How much of the transfer from resource to capital came from savings from the fourth crossing?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think as I've gone round the houses of this question, it's not just déjà vu of Margaret McCulloch and Elaine Murray's questions, it's déjà vu with Gavin Brown's questions. We've been round this point where I've made clear to Mr Brown that there are individual projects which make savings in terms of their overall financial allocations. The savings from the fourth replacement crossing in its original conception were used to fund a number of the long-term investment funds, the Warm Home Funds, Young Scots Fund, etc. There have been shorter-term savings made in the fourth replacement crossing because of the efficiency of the construction process that the Government has presided over, and at the budget statement in September I announced that £20 million was being taken out of the risk contingency on the fourth replacement crossing and invested in new housing projects, which I'm sure Mr Brown will welcome as a consequence of the value of that investment.
Thank you. Question 6, Tavish Scott.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what plans it has to support an independent Scottish Office of Budget Responsibility.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government recognises that a robust fiscal framework that ensures responsible management of government borrowing and financial planning is vital to the long-term sustainability of the public finances. In response to the second report of the Council of Economic Advisers in February 2010, the Scottish Government agreed in principle to the creation of a Fiscal Policy Commission alongside moves toward greater fiscal autonomy, including the opportunity to borrow. In March 2012, the First Minister announced that the Fiscal Commission Working Group will include Professors Andrew Hughes-Hallett, Sir James Mirrlees, Francis Ruane and Joseph Stiglitz.
Well, can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that reply? I hope what he is driving at is that Commission will ultimately be independent of government, because would he accept that Robert Choate, the boss of the OBR down in London, is an independent, respected and authoritative assessment of government finance growth figures and other figures that are produced for the benefit of assessing the state of the economy? In that light, would the Cabinet Secretary accept that if this Commission is to be meaningful and valuable for not just him but for future finance secretaries of whatever political persuasion, the important aspect is that it is independent of government?
Cabinet Secretary.
I agree unreservedly with that point. The essential lesson that has been arrived at from the work that was undertaken by the Council of Economic Advisers is that there is a discrete role that has to be undertaken, independent of government, to provide quality of information in relation to the financial assumptions that will arise out of the changes to the constitutional arrangements that we have. The Government accepts that argument, and we have taken the steps to ensure that a fiscal commission of the strength and capability of the members, the 4 members that I listed already, is able to undertake some of that important preparatory work on behalf of the Scottish Government and the Scottish public.
Thank you very much. Question 7, George Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how many business improvement districts have been established and are in development.
Minister Derek Mackay.
There are now 15 operational business improvement districts across Scotland, and a further 18 bids are in development.
George Adam.
I thank the Minister for his answer, and I am aware that he knows about the recent £20,000 that the Paisley bid received. Does the Minister agree with me that this money is a significant boost to the bid process in Paisley and will help take it to the next stage?
Minister.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Question 8, Christine McKelvey. More time for us.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how many businesses in the Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse constituency have received support from its direct interventions, such as the Small Business Bonus Scheme.
Minister Derek Mackay.
Data is not held on a constituency basis, but official statistics published on the 24th of October show that in the area of South Lanarkshire, almost 3,600 businesses properties are benefiting from the Small Business Bonus Scheme. This is the highest number since the introduction of the scheme, saving small businesses in South Lanarkshire, including those in Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse, over £28 million since 2008.
Thank you. Christina
Can
McKelvey.
I thank the Minister for that very welcome news and ask him to congratulate Hamilton, who voted in favour of their bid status very recently, and the Minister visited. The businesses in that area actually need this boost for their economic future. And in light of Labour's Cuts Commission, does the Minister share my concern that cutting the small business bonus would severely damage the future of these businesses in Hamilton?
Minister.
I think for some of the reasons given by Christina McKelvey, this government has secured the small business bonus. It is delivering for local businesses, and that's why we've committed to it over the lifetime of this Parliament.
Many thanks. Question 9, Jim Eadie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what recent representations the Cabinet Secretary for Finance and Sustainable Growth has received on the need for investment in cycling infrastructure.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
I feel a sense of trepidation in saying what I am about to say, Presiding Officer, but I have received one email dated 10th October from an MSP enclosing an email from one of their constituents. But having been on the receiving end of significant campaigns in the past, the correspondence recently has been more modest. However, the Minister for Transport and Veterans receives regular representations regarding a range of cycling issues, including road safety, cycle training and investment.
Jim Eadie.
The Cabinet Secretary's trepidation is unwarranted, but he will be aware that on this issue I do have some forum, having raised it previously in this chamber with the Transport and Climate Change Ministers. He will be further aware that a number of cycling organisations have real concerns that without sustained investment in cycling infrastructure, it will simply not be possible to meet the ambitious target of 10% of all journeys being made by bicycle by 2020. These organisations want to know that we share their ambition to make Scotland a cycle-friendly nation with the investment to match. Will he therefore agree to meet with me and Alison Johnson as the co-conveners of the cross-party group on cycling to discuss how we can build on the increased funding which there has been over the last 12 months in order that we can meet the 2020 target?
Cabinet Secretary.
I acknowledge and welcome Mr Eadie's long-standing interest in this question, and he will be aware that in the budget last year I committed to expenditure of £7.16 million this year and £8.16 and £9.16 for the following 2 years. On the 20th of September, I also announced an additional £6 million for cycling development, which I'm sure Mr Eadie will welcome. That is part of us taking very active steps to strengthen the provision that is put in place to assist in the development of cycling infrastructure in this respect. I would be very happy to meet with Mr Eadie and with Alison Johnson to discuss this issue further. I acknowledge the interest of a range of different organisations in this whole debate, and I'd be happy to have those further discussions.
Thank you. Claudia Beamish, supplementary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Might I highlight to the Cabinet Secretary that I have had a number of representations, both about urban and rural cycling issues and infrastructure, and on the basis of that question, and also being a member of the cross-party group on cycling, I'd like to ask if the Scottish Government intends to follow up the proposal to invest £1.32 billion over the next 11 years in active travel, as set out in the report on policies and proposals.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, clearly the Government sets out its financial commitments in the budget, and as I've just explained in my supplementary answer to Mr Eadie, the Government has made clear those financial plans. The work in relation to updating the report on policies and proposals is ongoing and will obviously be shared with Parliament in due course. What I would say is that the investment that the Government has put in place has clearly been increasing of recent years, and I'm sure that's an approach that will be welcomed across the Parliamentary Chamber.
Thank you very much. Question 10, Richard Baker.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions the Cabinet Secretary for Finance and Sustainable Growth has had with the Cabinet Secretary for Infrastructure and Investment to ensure that the 2012-13 budget for housing supports its ambition for new affordable and socially rented homes.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
President Officer, I have discussions with all Cabinet Secretaries at Cabinet meetings, as well as holding separate meetings with individual Cabinet Secretaries to discuss their portfolios. One of our highest priorities is taking action on housing in Scotland, which is why the Government is implementing a range of measures which not only increase the supply of affordable and social rented homes, but also support our construction sector, helping to create jobs and stimulate economic growth.
Thank you. Richard Baker.
I know the Cabinet Secretary is aware of the huge need in the North East for affordable homes, but how will the pledge on increased affordable housing be met with a budget cut of £66 million, and when of the additional £40 million he announced for housing in the budget statement, only £10 million of that is to be invested in the next year. I'm sure you'll say that with less investment, more homes are being built, but I'm told by housing associations in my region this has been achieved largely through the spending of their reserves, and these funds have now been exhausted.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, can I say to Mr Baker that clearly the Government is determined to achieve the commitments that we made in our manifesto of delivering 30,000 affordable homes during the 5 years of this Parliament. In the first year of that 5-year period, we successfully constructed 6,882 homes, which, on the basis of rudimentary arithmetic, would suggest that after 1 year we are ahead of our target. I have made the point to Parliament on many occasions before that the Government is using a variety of different measures to try to leverage more value from the housing expenditure that we have at our disposal. The National Housing Trust proposition, for example, requires significantly less government subsidy than the routine support that we would provide for RSL house construction programmes. So I think Parliament has got to focus ever more on the outcomes that have been achieved, in this case the number of houses that are being constructed, rather than the comparison of the sums of money available to the housing budget, because surely it is what is achieved and what is delivered as a consequence of our investment that matters, rather than simply comparing one budget line with another.
Thank you. Alec Johnston.
I hear the Minister's answer, but will he take the opportunity at this point to acknowledge the fact that the drip-feeding of announcements and the substantial re-announcement of small funding concessions does not disguise the fact that the housing budget is substantially lower than it was 2 years ago?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think, frankly, Mr Johnson is making a comment which is, is a bit rich from where he's sitting in this parliamentary chamber. The reason why the housing budget is under pressure, as are all of our capital budgets, is because our capital budget is £1 billion a year lower because of the actions of the Conservative government. That's why capital investment is under pressure. Now, Mr Johnson, I think, should get his argument straight. First of all, he should accept that point. Secondly, he should accept that this government is delivering more value for housing investment than anyone has ever delivered in the past. And thirdly, he should welcome the increased money that I'm putting into housing as a response to the prudent financial management by this administration.
Thank you very much. Question 11 has been withdrawn by Christine Graham, although an explanation has been provided. Question 12 now, Sarah Boyack.
To ask the Scottish Government when it will set the non-domestic rates per poundage for 2013-14.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
The Scottish Government will announce its non-domestic rates provisional poundage for 2013-14 as part of the local government finance settlement later this year. Final confirmation of the poundage level will be provided early in the new year, following the UK Government announcement of their poundage, which we are committed to matching.
Sarah Boyack.
The Minister will be aware of calls from the Scottish Chamber of Commerce that business rates for 2013-14 should be frozen in the light of the 5.6% increase in this year's rates, which were triggered as the high level of the RPI in September last year, which hit a 20-year spike. Can the Minister state what discussions he has had with the Scottish Chambers of Commerce regarding their calls, and can he clarify whether the Scottish Government is considering freezing rates, as the Scottish Chambers of Commerce suggest?
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Chambers of Commerce, if my recollection is correct, have not made any formal direct representations to me on this point. I have, of course, seen the material in the media on their call. I would, of course, be very happy to meet the Scottish Chambers of Commerce to discuss the proposal that they put forward. I do see them on a frequent basis and would be happy to consider any issues that they put to me. I would, however, have to make the point that I have set an assumption on the non-domestic rates income for 2013-14, which does have an inflation assumption embedded within it. And then, of course, if that was not to be applied, then there would, of course, be a financial consequence to the public finances of Scotland.
Thank you. Question 13, Alison Johnson.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government when the Tax Consultation Forum will next meet and what issues will be on the agenda.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
Plans for the Tax Consultation Forum are currently being developed. The aim of the forum is to provide opportunities for Scottish ministers to provide information to and seek views from those with an interest in tax and relevant issues, including proposed Scottish tax legislation and consultations. Arrangements for the first meeting will be made public as soon as possible.
Alison Johnson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his response. We learned recently that Starbucks, a patently profitable enterprise according to its shareholders' reports, has paid a mere £8.6 million in corporation tax in the UK in the last 14 years and paid nothing in the last 3 years. Now, clearly, Revenue Scotland and the prospect of further devolution represents a unique chance to take our time to build a fairer system rather than hastily importing UK problems and loopholes. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that any new taxation system in Scotland should explicitly support the local economy and small businesses who do pay their fair share of tax and support vital public services?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think by our actions we've demonstrated the way in which we are interested in supporting local economies, particularly through examples such as the small business bonus, which has given such an assistance to individual communities the length and breadth of the country, and also in the focusing of some of the other interventions that the government makes. Alison Johnson makes a very serious point in relation to the issues around about appropriate tax payment and the tackling of tax avoidance. I am currently immersed in these issues in looking at the Land and Buildings Transaction Tax, which will shortly be submitted to Parliament as a piece of legislation. There have been extensive discussions with various stakeholders to try to configure a regime that explicitly responds to the point that I made in my parliamentary statement prior to the summer recess, that the regime in Scotland should be constructed to aggressively tackle tax avoidance, and I give her that assurance that that will be at the heart of any legislation that the Government brings forward. In advance of the Tax Consultation Forum meeting, I can assure Alison Johnson and Parliament that these considerations have been extensively discussed with various stakeholders, including the Law Society of Scotland, the Institute of Chartered Accountants in Scotland, to ensure that we take the correct steps to construct legislation which minimises tax avoidance opportunities.
Thank you. Question 14, Stuart Stevenson.
To ask the Scottish Government what benefits arise from investment in entrepreneurial businesses.
Minister Fergus Ewing.
Presiding Officer, such investment benefits the economy, businesses and society.
Thank you. Stuart Stevenson.
Is the Minister aware that the Cabinet Secretary's announcement of the EDGE Fund has already been widely welcomed? Will the fund focus in particular on proposals that have the greatest prospect of creating new jobs and wealth in Scotland?
Minister.
I thank Stuart Stevenson for that question. The answer is yes, it will, and we are delighted that the EDGE Fund has been very warmly welcomed across the business and public sector. Sir Tom Hunter said that this is a huge boost for entrepreneurs in Scotland. Sir Willie Haughey said this scheme is something that Scotland has been crying out for. I have no doubt that this support for start-up businesses will increase the success rate. And to answer Mr Stevenson's question, this fund will indeed make awards to businesses judged most capable of delivering jobs and growth.
Many thanks. Question 15, Sandra White.
Presiding Officer, to ask the Scottish Government what its position is on the model of microfinance proposed by Grameen Scotland Foundation for tackling poverty.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government is supportive of the Grameen Scotland Foundation and has provided a grant towards the cost of setting up the Grameen Bank pilot in Scotland. Access to finance has been and remains an issue for some individuals wishing to set up in business, but who are unable to obtain finance from traditional funding sources like banks. So we welcome the focus of the initial UK branch on communities in and around the City of Glasgow.
Sandra White.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that reply and welcome the support the Scottish Government has provided for the project, a project devised by Nobel Laureate Muhammad Yunus, the new Chancellor of Glasgow Caledonian University, and one which has been inspirational across the globe.
The Cabinet Secretary will be aware that the University will look at the long-term impact of Grameen lending on the communities, and will the Scottish Government support this work? And if so, how will it feed this research into its own strategy for communities?
Cabinet Secretary.
I've been involved in discussions about the Grameen Scotland Foundation for some considerable time, and have been enormously struck by the effectiveness of the model that Professor Yunus and the Grameen Scotland Foundation have taken forward. For that reason, I gave early commitment to the Foundation of the Government's award of a grant of £100,000 to support the development of the Green Bank in Scotland. I will be monitoring the progress of the development very closely, because I think there are some very interesting lessons about the way in which microfinance can transform the life chances of individuals within some of the most deprived circumstances in our community. And I think the model is one that should attract a great deal of attention. I'm particularly proud that the first venture is taking place in Scotland. And finally, Presiding Officer, could I say that my colleague, the Education Secretary, Michael Russell, had the pleasure of being present at the Glasgow Caledonian University on Friday to witness the installation of Professor Yunus as the Chancellor of the University, and that is an appointment which the Government warmly welcomes.
Many thanks. Question 16, Graham Day.
To ask the Scottish Government what it is doing to assist small business in Angus.
Minister Fergus Ewing.
Small businesses, Presiding Officer, are the backbone of the rural economy in Scotland. The Small Business Bonus Scheme assists nearly 2,200 premises in Angus, and over 200 business start-ups in Angus have had help from the Business Gateway last year.
Thank you. Graham Day.
I thank the Minister for his answer. The Scottish Government Small Business Bonus has, as he says, provided vital financial assistance to high street shops across Angus, both in terms of protecting existing businesses and encouraging new start-ups. However, times are tough and shops are still closing down. I wonder whether the Minister agrees with me that the public also needs to support small-scale high street retailers on the basis of use them or lose them.
Minister.
Well, the Small Business Bonus has been a lifeline for businesses in Scotland, and they can make savings of up to £4,500 this year, £3,000 more than their counterparts south of the border, Presiding Officer, and 89,087 small businesses received help last year, up 4,000 from the previous year. I entirely agree with Graham Day's proposition, Presiding Officer, that all of us individually have a responsibility to use local shops or else risk losing them, and therefore we all have that duty and that pleasure to shop locally in our constituencies, and the answer therefore is in our hands, or more accurately perhaps in our wallets.
Thank you. Question 17, Mary Scanlon.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government for what reason unemployment in Scotland rose by 0.3% in the 3 months to August 2012, compared with a fall of nearly 0.2% across the UK.
Secretary John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, the difference is in part explained by the fact that it is estimated that more than 100,000 employment opportunities were created as part of the Olympic Games in the London area. Clearly, the impact of the Olympics is likely to be temporary, and these jobs may have a masking effect on the reality of the economic situation. In 12 of the last 18 monthly releases, the Scottish unemployment rate was equal or lower than the rate of the United Kingdom.
Mary Scanlon.
The Finance Secretary for his answer. Given the shortage of qualified and skilled engineers in the oil, gas and renewable energy industries, why have student numbers at further education colleges fallen by over 73,000 between 2008 and 2011? Does the Finance Secretary believe that young people in Scotland are being given the opportunities to access the skills to do these jobs?
Secretary.
I do believe that to be the case, and that is why the Government has put in place the funding that has maintained the full-time equivalent of student numbers that we put forward in 2011-12. I'd also say to Mary Scanlon that the announcement that I made in the budget on the establishment of an Energy Skills Academy is a very direct response to the fact that the oil and gas industry faces many challenges in obtaining the necessary skilled personnel to support its activities. and much of our activity through Curriculum for Excellence and other interventions to encourage more young people to become involved in an earlier stage in some of the technology and engineering disciplines is part of a long-term strategy to make sure that the oil and gas sector is properly supported, as with the renewable energy sector, in the employment challenges in the years to come.
Thank you.